All right, guys, in this video, we are going to talk about rounding fractions to the nearest half or whole. So first, what we're going to do right now is we're going to look at the fraction 4/14, and we want to determine, is it closest to 0, 1/2, or 1 whole? Since we don't have a whole number here, we know that our fraction falls between 0 and 1 whole. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare, and we're going to look at, well, what would 0, 1/2, and 1 whole look like if we had 14 as our denominator? So first we're going to make our denominator 14 in each of the three fractions. And the fraction that would be equal to 0 with 14 as a denominator would be 0/14. In 1 whole, we know that anytime our numerator and our denominator are the same, that represents 1 whole. So 0/14 represents 0, 14/14 is 1 whole, and then 7 is half of 14. So 7/14 is our halfway point. And we want to look at 4/14. 4 is less than 7, so we know it's going to fall somewhere between 0 and half. From 0 to 4, it is 4/14 away. And then from 4/14 to 7/14, it's 3/14 away. Go ahead and put a denominator there. So since it's 4 away from 0 and only 3 away from 7, we can say that 4/14 rounds to 1/2, or it is closest to 1/2. Let's look at another fraction where this time our denominator is an odd number. So again, I'm going to do the same thing I did above, and I'm going to go ahead and we want to represent our 0, 1/2, and our 1 whole. And we have 0/9 here. We have 9/9 here. And in the middle, we can kind of look at 9 as being 8 plus 1. And half of 8 is 4. And half of 1 is a half. Or we can write that as 0.5. So 4.5 is our halfway point here. Okay. And so 5/9, we know that that number or that fraction falls between the halfway point and the whole. So 4.5 to 5, this is only a half of a jump away. And from 5/9 to 9/9, it is 4/9 away. So we have 0.5/9 and 4/9. So it is clearly closer to 1/2. And so we can say that 5/9 rounds to a half. So let's look at 3/4. And again, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to look at 0/4 being representing 0. 2/4 represents the halfway point, and 4/4 represents 1 whole. 3/4 falls between 2/4 and 4/4. And if we look at the jumps, we can see that it is 1/4 away from a half, but it is also 1/4 of away from 1 whole. In an instant like this, where our fraction falls directly in the middle, we go back to our rule for whole numbers. And when we looked at 5, anytime we fell at 5 or directly in the middle, we rounded up. We're going to do the same thing with fractions. So 3/4 is going to round up to 1 whole. So it rounds to 1 whole. When we look at a fraction that has a mixed number with it, for example, if we're looking at 3 and let's do 2/5, we're going to do exactly the same thing, and the only difference this time, so again, 5 is going to be 4 plus 1. So it's going to be 2.5. So half of 4 is 2 and half of 1 is a half. So it's 2.5 fifths. And all we have to do is add the whole number there. And so we can see that 3 2/5 is going to fall right there. And it's close to rounding to 3.5. So it rounds to 3.5. So aside from doing that, we also want to be able to show our work with pictures, number lines, and words to explain that. So we're looking at the fraction 7/8. So if I were going to draw a picture to represent 7/8, all we have to do is go ahead and draw a rectangle. And remember, we want to do our best to make the parts as even as possible, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So when I represent 7/8, I'm going to shade in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, if I were looking, I know if these are 8s, my halfway point is 4. So this is my halfway point. And we can see that it is 3/8 away from half, and it's only 1/8 away from being a whole. So based on my picture alone, I can determine that 7/8 is going to round to 1 whole. We can do the same thing by placing 7/8 on a number line. And this is going to look very similar to the picture and the examples that I just gave you previously. So we would have 0/8, 8/8, and in the middle we're going to have 4/8. So we would have, let's see, 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8. And we can see that 7/8 is going to fall right there on our number line. And we can see that it is 1, 2, 3/8 away from half, and it's only 1/8 away from 1 whole. So in your description where it says explain in words, you're going to use your picture and or your number line to explain that 7/8 is 1/8 away from 1 whole, and 3/8 away from 1/2. Therefore, 7/8 rounds to 1 whole. So in that word section, just somehow you need to explain that 7/8 is closer to 1 whole, and you should be able to reference your picture to show exactly how many 8s or how many parts / jumps away it is. Okay, looking at the bottom, it says we're going to take it one step further. So if we know that 7/8 rounds to 1, we can determine that 4 7/8, so this is almost 1 here. So 4 7/8 is going to round to 5, or it would round up to the next whole. 22 7/8 is going to round up to the next whole, which would be 23. And 3 7/8 is going to round up to 4. And 11 7/8 would round up to 12. At this point in time, you have other examples that you, so you have this sheet here that's going to be 2 nights, and you're going to show us the exact same thing. And then rounding the fractions practice as well you can do at your station.